When it comes to video games, the debate over whether story or visual design holds more weight is one that is constantly evolving. Is it the narrative that drives players to keep going, or is it the visuals that catch their attention and pull them in? The answer often depends on the individual's preference and the specific game in question. Both elements contribute to a player's overall experience, each influencing their engagement in different ways. But one thing is certain: first impressions matter. Visual design, with its ability to immediately draw players in, often determines whether a game is even worth picking up. No matter how good the story might be, if the visuals don't capture a player's attention, the narrative can easily be overlooked. Visual appeal is usually the gateway to deeper engagement, with its stunning landscapes, character designs, and animation styles setting the tone for what is to come. It's the initial spark of interest that encourages players to dive in and explore. However, once they've been hooked by the visuals, the story takes over as the driving force behind their continued investment in the game. The emotional weight of a well-crafted narrative can alleviate the experience, making the visuals feel more meaningful and the gameplay more impactful. But what about those games where the visuals aren't as polished, yet the story shines through? In such cases, it's clear that the narrative can stand on its own, proving that even without breathtaking visuals, a compelling story can still hold the player's attention. Yet in a world where aesthetics are becoming increasingly important, how often does a lackluster visual design hinder a game's potential? And then the question then becomes, how much weight should we place on visual design when choosing to invest our time in a game? Should we prioritize the stunning art that initially captivates us? Or is it the heart of the experience found in the story that unfolds? And perhaps most importantly, how do these elements interact to create a memorable, lasting experience that resonates long after the game is over? When I first came across Arknights through an ad, I was somewhat drawn in. However, as soon as I saw the gameplay, my interest had quickly faded. The mechanics seemed boring, a 2D tower defense combat, and I just couldn't bring myself to download this game. It's funny to think about now because a few years later, I find myself deep in the gacha game sphere and decide to give Arknights another shot. This time I found myself completely hooked. It was actually pretty good, even though the way it was presented left a lot to be desired. This is where the issue of visual design versus gameplay becomes really important. Despite Arknights having a very compelling story, the way the game presents that story through static dialogue and a 2D tower defense gameplay can be a major turnoff for players. It's a shame because if you look beyond the presentation, the narrative is very rich and complex, but the game's delivery makes it hard to stay engaged long enough to get to the good parts. For many players, if a game doesn't have an appealing visual style, the chances of them giving it a second glance are slim. It's like judging a book by its cover, but in gaming, it's more than just aesthetics, it's about engagement. In my case, the initial visuals of Arknight were enough to get me to try the game, even though I wasn't convinced by the gameplay. Without that visual appeal, I would have never given the story a second chance. But it's not just about making a game look good. Visual design also impacts how a story is told. A game can have an amazing narrative, but if the design isn't engaging, it's very difficult for players to get invested. With Arknights, I found myself much more engaged with the story after watching the anime adaptation, which offered a more exciting presentation. This shift in presentation made me rethink how I approach the game's story in Act 2. Suddenly, I was paying more attention to the dialogue, absorbing the plot, and enjoying the experience in ways I hadn't before. This highlights how much visual design can influence a player's willingness to dive deeper into a game's world. Even if that story is strong, poor presentation can make it very difficult for players to connect with it. Now, I'm gonna be honest and say that I stopped playing for a while because a certain game with space and a train took over my gaming world. My account isn't the best, but recently I've been back on and the game is still very fun to me. But speaking of what pulls me into a game, when I first saw Wuthering Waves, I was immediately drawn to its style. The UI had this sleek, modern vibe, and the world design felt very immersive and atmospheric. The character designs were especially striking. In fact, Yinlin alone was able to get me to pre-register and download the game. I in fact made a deal with myself that if I lost the 50-50 on her banner, I'd quit the game entirely. That's how strong the visual pull was. And honestly, the world of Wuthering Waves only grew more beautiful over time. When version 1.3 came out with the Black Shores, it felt like the game had hit a new level of visual appeal. To me at least. At launch, in my opinion, the story was lacking. It lacked the weight and clarity, and it didn't do much to hook me in. But that started to change with the Black Shores update and Rinascira. That's when the narrative finally began to feel more meaningful. It was clear that the devs were listening, improving the story in response to player feedback. What makes Wuthering Waves so interesting to me is that it strikes a balance. The game used visual design to bring people in, but it knew that that alone wouldn't be enough to keep them around. A lot of players, myself included, stuck around because we hoped that the story and content would eventually catch up, and for their credit, I think it has started to. The point is, while the visuals of Wuthering Waves got me to play the game, they weren't enough to keep me around because I lost interest with the game in the second half of 1.1. Content and story are what sustain a player's interest. The beauty might bring you in, but it is the substance that makes you stay. But of course, not every game wins you over at first glance. Marvel Rivals is a great example for me. Despite being a fan of Overwatch, a game that holds a very special place in my heart, Marvel Rivals didn't interest me at all when I first saw it. In fact, it was kind of a turnoff. The third-person perspective felt awkward and unnecessary. The characters didn't look particularly fun or exciting to play. Visually, it lacked the charm that made me fall in love with Overwatch in the first place. Based on my first impression alone, I didn't expect to enjoy it and did not play it on release. But recently, I downloaded it and it has been one of the few games that I've been playing regularly. What it lacked in initial visual appeal for me was made up for with an incredibly addicting gameplay loop. It actually feels very similar to Overwatch in the best ways. Fast-paced, team-oriented, and very satisfying to master. While visual appeals might get you to the door, a strong gameplay loop can completely change your opinion and keep you coming back. Each of these games taught me something different about what draws players in and what keeps them around. With Arknights, it was the 2D tower defense gameplay and a static storytelling method that nearly pushed me away. Only later, through a different medium, did I come to appreciate the depth of its narrative. Wuthering Waves lured me in with its beautiful world design and character designs. But early story content couldn't hold my attention. That is, of course, until the devs stepped up and gave us something more compelling. And then there is Marvel Rivals, a game I initially dismissed purely because of how it looked, only to realize the gameplay itself is very addictive and fun. All three examples reveal something deeper about why we play games at all. Visual design may be the first thing we notice. It is the invitation and the spark of curiosity. But aesthetics alone can't carry a game. A story gives a game its soul, and gameplay gives it life. Without meaningful content or a satisfying loop, even the most beautiful worlds can feel empty. And without visual appeal, even a well-crafted experience can go unnoticed. What keeps us playing isn't just one of these elements, it's the way they support and elevate each other. A game resonates when it engages the senses, challenges the mind, and stirs something emotional or personal within us. It's not about whether story or visuals or even gameplay matter more. It's about how they come together and create something worth remembering.